Okay, let's jump in. Welcome back to the deep dive. This is the show where we take these huge, sometimes really intimidating philosophical texts, and we basically perform a full systems breakdown, a kind of surgical excavation, all designed to make you the most informed person in the room on this topic.
And today, we are definitely not just reading a history book. We're treating our sources, which are excerpts from René Descartes' landmark 1641 text, Meditations on First Philosophy. We're treating them as a philosophical reconstruction project. Our mission for you, the listener, is to get to a point of really logical precision and absolute clarity on the foundations he was trying to build.
And when we talk about foundations, I mean, the stakes for him could not have been higher. Right there in the dedicatory material, he tells you exactly what his goal is. He wants to establish the entire building of science on a foundation that is firm and permanent.
He was really facing a crisis of confidence in knowledge at the time. He believed the only way forward, the only way to save philosophy and science was to just start over. He explicitly states he wants to provide proofs for God's existence and the distinction between the soul and the body, and not just any proofs.
Right. He wanted proofs that were as certain and as evident as geometric demonstrations.
Exactly, like a proof in Euclid, that level of certainty.
And this is where his ambition it starts to sound almost unbelievably audacious. He doesn't just say he wants his proofs to be as good as geometry. He claims his arguments even surpass in certainty and evidence those demonstrations.
It's the ultimate mic drop, isn't it? But he does add a little caveat, a condition.
Right. He says the reader's mind has to be wholly free of prejudices.
Which is such a brilliant move. He's essentially saying, look, if you don't agree with me, the flaw isn't in my perfect logic. The flaw is in you, in your attachment to old opinions, and especially to your sensory experiences. It's a challenge that just sets the entire tone for the work.
So let's start where we always do, with the high-level takeaway. We've gone through the meditations, and we've synthesized the entire project into a single executive thesis. Here it is. Descartes' central claim is that by rigorously employing a method of universal doubt, the human mind can establish the existence of an infinitely perfect God and the essential distinction between the immaterial thinking substance, or mind, and extended substance, the body, thus providing certain foundations for philosophy and science.
That one sentence really does map out the entire journey from meditation I all the way through physics. But to really get why he had to do this, we need the contextual note. What was going on in 1641? What was the philosophical world like?
That's so vital. I mean, he didn't write this in a vacuum. What was the problem he was trying to solve?
Well, he was trying to resolve this massive foundational crisis of knowledge that had, let's say, two main parts. First, the intellectual world was just. It was overrun with skepticism. The old Aristotelian sciences were collapsing, and the new sciences, from people like Galileo, were constantly under attack because their conclusions often seemed to contradict just plain, everyday sensory experience.
Like the Earth moving, for instance.
Exactly. It doesn't feel like we're moving. So Descartes realized that all science, which rested on these unreliable old opinions or on faulty sensory data, was just incredibly vulnerable. He needed to prove with absolute certainty that true knowledge was even possible.
And the second problem was, I would argue, even more sensitive at the time, certainly politically and theologically.
Absolutely. He had to provide rational demonstrations for the existence of God and the immortality of the soul using only what he called natural reason. His stated goal, right in the dedicatory, was to persuade infidels.
And that's such a key detail. He needed a proof that didn't just end up being circular.
Precisely. You can't tell a skeptic, well, we have to believe in God because the Holy Scriptures say so, and we have to believe the Holy Scriptures because they come from God.
Right. A skeptic is just going to laugh at that. It's a closed loop.
And Descartes saw that. He knew that chain of reasoning just fails instantly if you present it to someone who doesn't already accept the premise of religious authority. So he had to build certainty from ground zero. Prove God's existence first, without ever touching Scripture.
It's just such a bold move to put metaphysics and the existence of God at the very, very beginning of the whole scientific enterprise. For him, you can't have reliable physics, you can't have reliable math until you resolve these, like, the deepest possible uncertainties. So, okay, let's get to that absolute starting point, the process of getting to ground zero, the method of doubt in meditation. He knows he can't go through every single belief he's ever held. That would be, as he says, an endless undertaking.
So he comes up with a demolition strategy. Instead of checking every single brick in the house of knowledge, he decides to attack the foundation, the principles upon which all my former opinions rested. He's aiming for a general upheaval of all my former opinions.
And the rule of this game is completely ruthless. If he can find even one tiny reason to doubt a belief, no matter how small or, far-fetched that reason is, the belief has to be thrown out completely. Rejected, as he says, just as if I had discovered that it was absolutely false. It's an intellectual scorched earth policy.
And this leads him to these three systematic layers of doubt. He designs them to dismantle every possible source of knowledge one by one, moving from the things that are kind of easy to doubt to the most radical, world-shattering doubts imaginable.
The first level, and it's the weakest one, is just doubting the senses. And this is easy enough. We all know our senses can be deceptive, especially with things that are really far away or very small.
Right. The classic example of seeing a square tower that looks round from a distance or a straight stick that looks bent when you put it in water. Simple illusions.
But, as he points out, no sane person would doubt the immediate presence of their own body just because they sometimes misjudge the shape of a tower. If I'm sitting here by the fire holding these notes, I feel certain of this. So he needs a stronger weapon of doubt.
Mm-hmm. And that brings us to the second, much more powerful layer, the dream argument. This is where the doubt really starts to hit home.
It really does.
He asks himself, how can I be certain that I'm here, seated by the fire, attired in a dressing gown, when I have so often had these exact same sensations, the same feeling of certainty, while I was fast asleep and dreaming?
And he really emphasizes the sheer impossibility of telling the two states apart. He says he sees so manifestly that there are no certain indications by which we may clearly distinguish wakefulness from sleep, that I am lost in astonishment.
It's a devastating philosophical move. I mean, if you really take it seriously, if you cannot be 100% sure you aren't dreaming, then the belief that you have a physical head or hands or even a body at all, it could all just be a false delusion that your mind is creating in a dream.
It connects so strongly to our, modern obsession with things like simulation theory. I mean, long before The Matrix or Inception showed us these possibilities of simulated reality, Descartes gave us the ultimate philosophical reality check.
Hmm.
How do you know you're not dreaming right now? I mean, for all I know, I could be dreaming that I'm explaining 17th century philosophy to thousands of people.
And that's where the skeptical dread really sinks in. So if we might be dreaming, then specific, what he calls compound things, like my hands, this fire, these colors, they're all doubtful. But Descartes notices, even in dreams, some simple universal truths still seem to survive.
Right. Whether I'm awake or dreaming, 2 plus 3 still equals 5. Or the fundamental building blocks of the world, things like extension, shape, quantity, number, they still seem to hold true. He calls them the sciences, which only treat of things that are very simple and very general, and they contain some measure of certainty.
So the dream argument successfully takes down physics, biology, really all empirical science, but it leaves mathematics and these abstract concepts still standing, which means he needs one final, truly radical weapon to get to absolute rock bottom.
And that's the third and most radical level of doubt, the evil genius hypothesis. This is designed specifically to destroy the certainty of even those simple mathematical truths.
The hypothesis is actually pretty simple, but its consequences are just terrifying. What if, instead of a supremely good God, we were created by some evil genius, not less powerful than deceitful, who has used all of his energy just to deceive us?
And this isn't just about tricking our senses. This deceiver is so powerful, he could be manipulating my very mind, my intellect. He could arrange things so that every single time I calculate 2 plus 3, I get the answer 5, but I am still being systematically fooled. Fooled by the nature of number itself, or even the logical necessity of that answer.
And suddenly, everything is gone. The heavens, the earth, colors, figures, sounds, all of it becomes just illusions and dreams. The result of meditation is a total existential collapse of knowledge. There's absolutely nothing left that we can be certain of, except maybe the internal act of doubt itself. We've reached philosophical ground zero, ready for the reconstruction to begin.
Okay, so before we can even get to that glorious reconstruction, the actual step-by-step argument for God's existence, we have to pause. And this is critical. You really cannot follow Descartes' logic unless you master his vocabulary.
This is so important. He takes common words like idea or reality, and he uses them in these very specific, technical, and interconnected ways that are not how we use them today.
This is exactly where listeners and students just get overwhelmed. We're essentially defining the operating system for the entire Cartesian universe. If you confuse these terms, the whole argument that follows just falls apart. So let's take the time we need to really lock these down.
Okay, first up, thinking thing. or in Latin, res cogitans.
This is what's left after the doubt, right?
Yeah, exactly. The immediate, indubitable truth that remains after the evil genius has done his worst is the cogito. I think, therefore I am. The nature of the self is boiled down to its absolute bare minimum.
He says, I am, I exist, that is certain. But how often? Just when I think. For it might possibly be the case if I ceased entirely to think that I should likewise cease altogether to exist. I mean, that is a terrifying thought. Your existence is literally conditional on your consciousness.
It is. But okay, so what does this thing which thinks actually do? Descartes gives us the full definition in Meditation 2. He says it is a thing which doubts, understands, conceives, affirms, denies, wills, refuses, which also imagines and feels.
So even things that seem really sensory, like imagination and feeling, for him, they're just modes of thought. They're activities happening inside the mind, not the body. The res cogitans is his pure, immaterial self, totally separate from the physical world.
That's it. Okay, second term. Clear and distinct perception.
This is his new gold standard for truth, since the senses are totally unreliable.
Correct. Since the senses are debunked, the foundation for any new knowledge has to be internal to the mind. And this is his standard.
Okay, let's break that down, because they're two different conditions, right?
Yeah.
Clarity isn't the same as distinctness. What's clarity?
Clarity means the perception is present and manifest to the attentive mind. It's vivid, it's immediate, you can't avoid it. Think of looking at a glass of water right in front of you on a bright, sunny day. The image is clear.
Okay, but you said clarity isn't enough. So what does the distinctness part add to it?
Distinctness means the perception is so separated from all other perceptions that it contains nothing but what is clear. It's sharply defined, you know exactly what the thing is, and just as importantly, what it is not. So if you look at that glass of water and you distinctly perceive its cylindrical shape, you know with certainty that that shape is not a cube, and that the glass is not the water that's inside of it.
Ah, I see. So a painter might have a very clear perception of a blurry, foggy landscape, but they don't have a distinct perception of the individual trees in the distance. To count as knowledge, a perception has to be both vivid and precisely defined.
And the entire philosophical structure he's about to build depends on the rule he confirms later on. All things which I perceive very clearly and very distinctly are true. That's the bedrock.
Okay, number 3, extension, or res extensa.
This one's more straightforward. If thought is the essential attribute of the mind, then extension is the essential primary attribute of the body.
So physical stuff.
Basically, yes. Res extensa is simply physical quantity. It's magnitude in length, breadth, or depth. For Descartes, body is defined geometrically. He says, by the body, I understand all that which can be defined by a certain figure, something which can be confined in a certain place, and which can fill a given space.
So the very essence of physical reality, the stuff that science studies, is that it takes up space and you can measure it.
Yeah.
And that's why geometry and mathematics become the only reliable way to know anything about the external world, not, say, its taste or its smell.
Precisely. Now, this next one is the trickiest of all. Number 4, idea, and specifically the difference between objective and formal reality.
Okay, deep breath. Because he himself said the term idea is equivocal or ambiguous.
He did. And we have to understand the two different ways an idea can have reality, because this difference is the entire engine of his proof for God's existence.
All right, let's start with the easier one. What's formal reality?
Formal reality, which you can think of as actual reality, is pretty simple. It's the reality a thing has just by existing. A mountain that actually exists out there in the world has formal reality. The level of perfection or reality that I, as a thinking thing, possess in reality, that is my formal reality.
Okay, so that's reality as we basically understand it. The actual existence of a thing. So what on earth is objective reality?
This is the mind-bending one. Objective reality is the reality that an idea has by representation. It's the level of perfection or the essence that is represented by the idea itself. And this is the key part. Even if the thing it represents does not actually exist outside the mind.
Whoa, okay. So if I have an idea of a perfect, magical unicorn, the idea itself, just as a thought in my head, has a certain amount of objective reality. It has the perfection that's represented by the unicorn's form and its magic and whatever. And it has this, even though the unicorn has zero formal reality because it doesn't exist.
You've got it. And that's the critical distinction. I see the idea of a unicorn has some objective reality, but it's pretty low because it's just a mashup of things I already know, a horse, a horn. But the idea of God has a maximum and infinite objective reality because it represents supreme, infinite perfection. The idea itself, objectively, has this massive intellectual weight.
I think I'm getting it. So when he gets to his main argument later, the one that says the cause has to have at least as much reality as the effect, he's saying the cause's formal reality has to be at least equal to the idea's objective reality.
Right.
So if we put it on a scale, say my formal reality is a 5 out of 100 because I'm a finite, imperfect being.
Right.
And the idea of God has an objective reality of 100 because it represents infinity, then that 100 has to come from a cause that is formally a 100. Is that right?
That's exactly it. That objective reality isn't nothing. He says it's a mode of being that has a certain value, a magnitude of perfection, and that value demands an equal cause. If you think of objective reality as the amount of perfection represented in an idea, the cause must have that amount of perfection actually within it, formally.
Okay, that helps. Let's move to number 5, eminently.
This is sort of a mechanism that allows the transfer of reality to work more efficiently. To possess something eminently just means to contain the reality of that thing, but in a higher degree of being or perfection. This lets a cause produce an effect that has a lesser formal reality.
Can you give us an analogy for that? What does eminently look like?
Think about a master artist. The artist has, let's say, a high formal reality. They contain the idea of a beautiful statue. They contain it eminently, in a higher, more perfect, more causal way. They can then produce the statue itself, which has a lower formal reality than the artist. God, being supremely perfect, contains all the lower perfections of creation, not just formally, but eminently. He doesn't just have the reality of humans and mountains and stars. He has them in an infinitely superior, non-limited way.
Got it. Okay, last one, quickly. Number 6, indifference. This comes up when he talks about free will and human error.
Right. For Descartes, when we feel indifference, it means we're trying to decide between two options, but we're not swayed by clear reason, we're just undecided. And crucially, Descartes sees this as a defect. It's a negation in knowledge, not some sign of perfect freedom.
That really goes against the common idea that freedom is just being able to choose whatever you want for no reason at all.
Completely. For Descartes, true freedom is being compelled by the truth. He says, the more clearly I see that something is true or good, the more freely do I choose and embrace it. If I clearly and distinctly perceive that 2 + 3 = 5, I must agree. And for him, that assent is the highest form of freedom. Indifference, that feeling of not having a compelling reason, just shows a lack or negation in knowledge than a perfection of will. It's an intellectual failure, not a spiritual victory.
Okay, we have the toolkit, we've defined the terms, now we can finally move into meditation 3 where Descartes deploys all this vocabulary to build his causal argument for God's existence. The big takeaway here is that Descartes basically weaponized the concept of perfection against the skeptic. He turned the very act of thinking about God into an undeniable external proof of God.
And this argument is the massive hurdle he absolutely must clear to defeat the evil genius. Until he proves God exists and is not a deceiver, he can't trust anything beyond the bare fact of his own thinking, the cogito. The entire reconstruction hangs on one fundamental, self-evident truth, which he calls the bedrock principle.
Which is?
The necessity of reality in the cause. He says, the light of nature causes me to know clearly that the ideas in me can never contain anything greater or more perfect than their cause. You can't get something from nothing. Reality cannot be invented out of thin air. It must be conserved. The effect can never be greater than its cause.
Okay, but hold on a minute. We've just established that the evil genius could be fooling me about everything, including simple math. So how does he know, while he's still under this radical doubt, that this causal principle, that reality has to be conserved, is true? Isn't he just sneaking in a huge assumption right when he needs it most?
That is an absolutely critical point of friction, and it's where the power of the cogito does all the heavy lifting. The causal principle is affirmed by what he calls the natural light of reason. Because the self has already been proven to exist as a thinking thing, and the act of thinking itself is indubitable, any truth that is clearly and distinctly perceived as necessary by that thinking self is immediately guaranteed.
So it's not an observation about the external world. It's an internal, logical necessity.
Exactly. The moment he thinks about the causal principle clearly and distinctly, the principle itself is guaranteed by the immediate certainty of the thinking process that is perceiving it. That's what makes it foundational and immune to the evil genius doubt.
Okay, that distinction is crucial. Let's proceed with the formal steps of the argument.
All right, P1. The causal principle, or the conservation of reality. All ideas have an efficient cause, and that cause must possess at least as much formal reality as the idea possesses objective reality. This is the non-negotiable law of reality transfer. He says, now it is manifest by the natural light that there must at least be as much reality in the efficient and total cause as in its effect.
The rule is set. So next he has to identify the specific idea he's going to scrutinize.
Right. P2. The idea of God. I possess within my mind the clear and distinct idea of God, and I define God as an infinite, eternal, immutable, omniscient, omnipotent, supremely perfect substance. This idea of absolute perfection is found clearly within me, the res cogitans.
In P3 is where he establishes that crucial imbalance in reality. The whole argument really rests on this point.
Yes. P3. The reality differential. The objective reality contained in my idea of an infinite, supremely perfect substance God is demonstrably greater than the formal reality of myself, since I am a finite, doubting, and imperfect substance.
Okay, but why is that differential so certain? I mean, I am a substance. Why couldn't I be the cause of the idea of infinity? Maybe I just imagined it by negating my own finitude.
That's a common objection, but Descartes argues that the concept of infinity and perfection is actually primary, and my concept of finiteness is derived from it. He says, I know that I doubt, which means I know I am imperfect, but I can only know that I am imperfect because I already have the idea of a perfect being God to compare myself against. As he puts it, the idea of the infinite must precede the idea of the finite. My finite, doubting, formal reality simply lacks the inherent perfection required to produce an idea with infinite objective reality.
So P4 just formalizes that limitation of my own being.
Exactly. P4. Self-causation is impossible. I cannot be the cause of this idea of God. The less perfect thing, my finite self, cannot produce the representation of the more perfect, the infinite perfection contained objectively in the idea. If I were powerful enough to be the cause of this idea, I would be the cause of my own existence, and I would have made myself perfect, but I'm clearly not.
So if the effect, this idea of God, exists in my mind, and I'm not powerful enough to have caused it, then the cause must lie somewhere outside of me.
Which leads to P5, the necessary cause. The only possible efficient cause that possesses formal reality equal to or eminently greater than the objective reality of the idea of God is God himself, an actually existing, infinite, supremely perfect being.
And that leads him to the inevitable conclusion.
C, God exists. Therefore, God, a supremely perfect and infinite being, necessarily exists. The proof takes the intellectual content of my own mind and demonstrates that the origin of that content must be external and infinite.
Now, we should quickly touch on the supplementary argument he uses to sort of bolster this main causal chain. It's the requirement for continuous conservation. He basically says even if you could somehow pop into existence on your own, you couldn't keep yourself there.
It's a really powerful metaphysical observation. He argues that time is composed of discrete, independent moments. He says, all the course of my life may be divided into an infinite number of parts, none of which is in any way dependent on the other.
So the fact that I existed a microsecond ago doesn't guarantee my existence right now. It takes the same infinite creative power to conserve me in every single moment as it took to create me in the first place.
And Descartes states this distinction between creation and conservation is solely a distinction of the reason. They are, metaphysically speaking, the same act, and they both require the same infinite cause. Since my finite mind is conscious of no internal power to guarantee my own existence from one instant to the next, I must be conserved by an external, supremely powerful being. And that being must possess infinite perfection, which, by definition, is God. The primary argument is sound, and this conservation argument just reinforces our ongoing dependency on that cause.
Okay, that formal logical reconstruction is the absolute backbone of the meditations, but I can guarantee that our listeners stuck right where we were a few minutes ago on a core difficulty, the reality transfer between objective and formal reality. The jump from P1 to P4 is the most densely packed logic in the entire text.
You're absolutely right. We need to slow down and really unlock the density of that passage. This is the crucial, most challenging part of the whole causal argument, and it all rests on one specific paragraph in Meditation 3. We can call it the crux. Let me read it. He says, but in order that an idea should contain one certain objective reality rather than another, it must without doubt derive it from some cause in which there is at least as much formal reality as this idea contains of objective reality. For if we imagine that something is found in an idea which is not found in the cause, it must then have been derived from naught. But however imperfect may be this mode of being by which a thing is objectively or by representation in the understanding by its idea, we cannot certainly say that this mode of being is nothing, nor consequently that the idea derives its origin from nothing.
It's so dense. Let's translate that into plain, relatable English. The absolute key here is that first assumption he makes, that objective reality, the represented perfection in the idea, is not nothing. It's a real thing that needs a real cause.
Exactly. Even though the idea of God only exists in my mind, it isn't physically floating around out there. The content of that idea, its objective reality, is philosophically substantial. It has a high intellectual perfection value, so to speak.
And this is where that ancient principle, ex nihilo nihil fit nothing, comes from nothing, gets weaponized.
Yeah.
If the cause, which is my finite self, doesn't actually possess the same level of reality, the same formal reality that the idea of God represents, its objective reality, then all that extra perfection found in the idea must have just sprung into existence spontaneously, out of nothing.
And if you accept the causal principle, P1, which is guaranteed by the natural light of reason, then that is just impossible. To see the difference, think back to simpler ideas. I can produce the idea of a hippogriff, right? Because I have formal reality that contains all its component parts. I know what a man is, I know what wings are, I know what a horse is. My finite self has enough formal reality to just combine these finite elements.
But the idea of infinite perfection is totally different. It's not a composite. You can't build it out of finite parts. It's absolute, endless, non-limited being. I can't derive that concept of infinity from my own experience of finiteness because they're fundamentally contradictory concepts.
And since I am finite and the idea is infinite, the infinite objective reality of the idea must have been planted in my mind by a source that is itself formally infinite.
Okay, to make this completely concrete, let's use that analogy you mentioned Descartes hints at in the preface, the one involving a complex machine. Let's really flesh that out for the listener.
Great idea. Analogy: the complex machine and the engineer. Imagine you are completely alone, you're in a deserted cave, and you find a perfectly detailed, complex, working blueprint for an incredibly advanced, infinitely complicated machine. This blueprint represents the idea of God with its incredibly high objective reality. It details every single aspect of infinity, perfection, and omnipotence.
Okay, so I'm looking at the blueprint. Now, if I just look at it materially, as a thought in my mind or as ink on paper, it has a very low formal reality. It's just a finite artifact.
But the blueprint's content, the vast, sophisticated, infinitely complex design that could not have been created by you, a finite being who only has the formal reality to, say, scribble some cave drawings. The information, the complexity, the perfection represented on that blueprint, its objective reality, is far, far greater than your own inherent reality.
Therefore, the sheer objective complexity of the idea demands a cause that possesses that knowledge and power formally, in actual reality. It demands an engineer or an inventor who is actually as perfect and as capable as the blueprint objectively suggests. Finding the idea of God in your mind is like finding a finished blueprint for the entire universe in a cave. It proves an infinitely capable engineer was there and left it for you.
And once that proof is accepted, the entire philosophical game changes. It leads directly to the stability he finds in Meditations 4 and V.
It's the ultimate bridge to certainty. Because God is defined as supremely perfect and, as he says, in all fraud and deception some imperfection is to be found, then God must be no deceiver. This non-deceiving God is the guarantee that finally, once and for all, defeats the evil genius hypothesis.
Yes. This secure foundation means that the rule of truth is now locked in. Everything we perceive clearly and distinctly must be true, because a non-deceiving God would not allow our most certain and clear intellectual perceptions to be false, and this secures not just the existence of the external world, which comes later, but the absolute certainty of mathematics and logic, which the evil genius had put in doubt.
So with that foundation of certainty now established, Descartes immediately applies his rule of truth to address the other major goal he set out in the Dedication. And that is the distinction between mind and body, which is the cornerstone of Cartesian dualism. And he explores that in Meditation the Sixth.
And this distinction is so crucial because it provides a rational mechanism for the immortality of the soul. If the mind is an essentially distinct substance from the body, then it can survive the body's destruction.
So how does he prove it?
He just uses the definitions we established earlier, but now they're guaranteed by a non-deceiving God, he says. I have a clear and distinct idea of myself as a thinking, unextended thing, a res cogitans. I also have a clear and distinct idea of a body as an extended, unthinking thing, a res extensa.
And his argument for their separability is almost deceptively simple. If I can clearly and distinctly conceive of two things independently of each other, then God, who can create anything I can clearly conceive, can create them separately.
Therefore, my essence consists solely in the fact that I am a thinking thing, separate and distinct from my body. If you think of it in modern terms, the mind is the software, defined purely by its operations, thinking, willing, doubting. The body is the hardware, defined purely by its physical dimensions, its extension. Since the software can be distinctly conceived of apart from the hardware, the two are essentially different substances.
And he reinforces this distinction very powerfully with what you could call the divisibility test.
Any physical body, any res extensa, is inherently divisible. You can always take even the smallest piece of matter and intellectually conceive of it as being composed of smaller parts. But the mind, the res cogitans, is entirely indivisible.
How does he prove its indivisibility?
He just observes it directly. He says, I cannot distinguish in myself any parts, but apprehend myself to be clearly one and entire. He points out that if I lose an arm or a leg, nothing has been taken away from my mind. The mind operates as a single unified whole. So since the body is by its nature divisible and the mind is by its nature indivisible, they cannot possibly be the same substance. It confirms their contrary natures.
But before he could even get to that final conclusion, he had to prove the priority of intellectual knowledge over the senses. And that's the whole purpose of that classic thought experiment, the wax argument, back in Meditation 2.
Yes, this is one of the most memorable thought experiments in all of philosophy because it just so elegantly isolates the pure intellectual concept of substance from its sensory properties. We start with a simple piece of beeswax.
Right, and it has all these clear, sensible qualities. A certain taste of honey, a scent of flowers, a particular color, a specific shape. It's hard.
But then you bring it close to the fire, you heat it, and all of those qualities change dramatically. The taste and smell vanish, the color and the figure change completely. It becomes liquid, hot, and soft to the touch. The senses are now reporting a totally different object.
But the crucial realization is that despite the complete transformation of every single one of its sensible qualities, its accidents, the same wax remains. And the question Descartes poses to himself, and to us, is, what is it that remains? What is the wax itself?
It can't be something known by the imagination or the senses because they only report the contradictory changes. What remains is known solely by the understanding, by the intellect. It is merely an extended thing which is flexible and movable, and it's capable of an infinitude of similar changes.
And the imagination can't picture an infinitude of changes. You can only picture one shape and then another and then another. So the essential concept of the wax, its pure extension, its underlying substance, is grasped not by the body, not by the imagination, but only by the intuition of the mind. The mind knows the wax more distinctly than the senses ever could.
And this is the moment where intellectual knowledge takes clear priority over sensory knowledge. The senses, when you trust them for objective truth, lead you to contradictions and errors. Only the mind can penetrate to the true geometric essence of an object.
Which brings us to Descartes' final, much more balanced assessment of the senses in Meditation 6. He concludes they are useful, but they have a very limited job.
Limited in their philosophical utility, yes, but absolutely vital for our survival. He says nature teaches us to flee from pain and seek out pleasure. The senses are designed merely for the purpose of signifying to my mind what things are beneficial or hurtful to the composite whole.
What's the composite whole?
The mind-body union. They are reliable feedback mechanisms for the survival of that union. Thirst reliably signals the body's need for water. Pain reliably signals harm. In this very specific practical role, they do convey a kind of truth.
But the error comes when we try to elevate them beyond that practical role, when we use them as absolute rules by which I might immediately determine the essence of the bodies which are outside me.
Exactly. When we rely on our senses to tell us the objective physical truth about the world, for instance, trusting our eyes when they tell us that distant objects like the moon or stars are tiny, or that a large square tower is round from far away, we just inevitably fall into error. They're excellent biological tools for preservation, but they are terrible guides for physics and metaphysics.
Wow. What a monumental reconstruction. I mean, he systematically dismantles every single source of certainty, finds that one absolute minimum Archimedes, 1 point fixed and immovable in the cogito, And then just by examining the contents of his own mind, rebuilds everything. The certainty of God, the foundation of mathematics, and the distinct nature of the soul.
It really is the ultimate systematic intellectual house cleaning. And I think the final takeaway for you, the learner, is the sheer power and utility adopting radical doubt as a methodological tool.
By rejecting anything that could possibly be doubted, Descartes guarantees that the things we ultimately accept as true are, as he says, impossible for us ever to doubt again. The process itself is what secures the result.
And the key lesson is methodological. When you're approaching a dense text or a complex scientific theory, you can't just assume the foundations are sound. You have to follow Descartes and determine the necessity and the reality of the ideas being presented, just like he sought the necessary cause for the idea of God. You have to reconstruct the logic from the ground up, not just take the conclusions for granted.
And that brings us to our final provocative thought for you to chew on as you move forward from this deep dive.
Descartes, in Meditation V, makes the certainty of all of geometry, which is the bedrock of so much of modern physics and engineering and calculus, he makes it reliant on the prior certainty of a non-deceiving God.
So if Descartes is right, does the current total reliance on mathematics and geometrical physics in modern science, does it implicitly rest upon his success in metaphysics? Is our trust in gravity and orbital mechanics and computer simulations ultimately an inherited faith in a God that science itself has often marginalized, but whose necessity Descartes argued he had successfully proven?
Something to ponder next time you stare up at a distant, tiny-looking star and then use a mathematical formula to calculate its true, massive size. We'll see you on the next Deep Dive.